Everything you think you know about World War I is a lie. You've been told it started with a single gunshot in Sarajevo, that Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets assassinated, alliances kick in, and boom, millions dead in the trenches. But what if I told you the real spark wasn't a bullet? It was a checkbook, and in the next 10 minutes I'm going to show you how a handful of bankers in smoke-filled rooms from London to New York scribbled loans worth billions that turned a Balkan squabble into the bloodiest catastrophe humanity had ever seen. Here's the part that will make your blood boil. They funded both sides. Stick around, because by the end, you'll understand why your history textbook conveniently skipped this, and how this same playbook is being used in every war fought today, right now, as you're watching this. Let's rewind to 1914. Europe's a powder keg, nationalism's raging, militaries are flexing, and yeah, that assassination in Sarajevo lights the fuse. But peel back the propaganda posters and you'll find something way more sinister. A financial arms race that had been brewing for decades. I'm talking about empires drowning in debt from gobbling up colonies, gold standards creaking under the weight of industrial greed, and a web of secret treaties that weren't about borders. They were about bottom lines. They were about profit. Picture this. Britain and France, the old guard, sitting on massive colonial halls in Africa and Asia, sucking in raw materials like rubber and oil to feed their factories. But they're leveraged to the hilt. Debts from endless imperial adventures piling up like unpaid credit cards. Germany, the upstart industrial powerhouse, late to the colonial party, desperate for scraps in Morocco and the Middle East to fuel its steel mills. Russia and Austria-Hungary crumbling giants borrowing just to keep their multi-ethnic empires from fracturing. And pulling the strings? Not kings or kaisers, but the merchant banks of the City of London. Rothschilds, Barings, Morgans, lending at rates that would make a loan shark blush. By 1914, the global economy is this fragile web tied to the gold standard. Every nation's currency backed by bullion, meaning one hiccup in trade or tariffs and gold flows out like blood from a wound. Imperial rivalries weren't just ego trips. They were economic lifelines. Britain blocks German ships in the North Sea. That's not Navy games. That's starving Berlin's exports, crushing their banks, choking their economy. And here's the mind-blower we're unpacking today. These financial feuds didn't just make war inevitable. They financed it. From J.P. Morgan's $500 million lifeline to the allies that destroyed U.S. neutrality, to Germany's desperate gold grabs from its own allies, this was a bankers' war from the very beginning. But wait, did these bankers know what they were unleashing? Or was it just business? The receipts are coming, and they're wilder than anything you've been taught. Let's start at the root. Imperialism wasn't some noble quest for glory. It was a cash grab, plain and simple. By the late 1800s, Europe's great powers had carved up Africa like a Thanksgiving turkey, Britain snagging Egypt and South Africa for cotton and gold, France digging into West Africa and Indochina for rubber, Germany elbowing in late with Tanganyika and Namibia for phosphates. Why? Their factories were belching smoke 24/7, churning out steel rails and rifles. But they needed cheap resources to keep profits fat. Colonies meant free or nearly free labor, locked-in markets, raw materials shipped back to Manchester or Berlin at pennies on the dollar. But here's the rub. Building these empires wasn't cheap. Railways through jungles, forts in deserts, wars with locals who didn't fancy being colonized. All on the government's dime, which meant borrowing big from private banks. Britain, the sun never sets champion, owed billions in bonds by 1900, much of it to those five titans of the city. Rothschilds with their web spanning Paris to Vienna, Barings, who just survived their own Argentine debt fiasco, and J.P. Morgan across the pond, eyeing Europe like a kid in a candy store. These weren't public loans. They were sweetheart deals, collateralized by future colonial taxes. Your grandfather's taxes in Mumbai or Lagos paying interest to bankers in London. France? Their North African push left Paris bankers like Credit Lyonnais sweating over Ottoman-style debt administrations that basically turned empires into ATMs for lenders. Germany felt the squeeze hardest. United just in 1871, they were playing catch-up, their navy budget ballooning to rival Britain's, while colonies like Togo barely paid for themselves. By 1913, Berlin's external debt hit 20 billion marks, funneled through the Reichsbank and private houses like Deutsche Bank. Russia? Tsar Nicholas was borrowing from French banks to arm against the Ottomans, racking up 6 billion francs in bonds that made St. Petersburg a puppet on Paris's string. It sounds like Monopoly gone mad, right? But here's the thing. This debt pyramid was teetering. Tariffs spiked, trade wars erupted. Britain's splendid isolation meant squeezing German exports, which crashed Berlin's gold reserves. One bad harvest in the colonies, one rebellion in India, and the whole system was one default away from chaos. These weren't sideshows. They bred paranoia. Kaiser Wilhelm II wasn't just paranoid about encirclement. He was staring at bankruptcy if Britain choked his African roots. And the banks? They loved it. More tension meant more loans, higher interest rates, bigger profits. By 1914, Europe's economy was a house of cards, with each king holding a mortgage from the same lenders. But how does this tip into total war? Enter the gold standard, the invisible handcuffs that turned rivalries into do or die. Deep breath. Time to talk about the gold standard. Sounds boring, like something from an economics textbook. But this was the financial doomsday machine that locked Europe into war. Since the 1870s, every major power pegged their currency to gold. 1 pound, 1 mark, 1 franc, all redeemable for a fixed chunk of the shiny stuff. It kept trade smooth, prices stable. Until it didn't. Why? Gold's finite. Wars, famines, strikes. Anything disrupting mining or trade meant gold outflows, currency crashes, and panic. Britain hoarded 40% of the world's bullion in 1914, thanks to colonial ports from South Africa and Australia. Germany scraping by with Reichsbank vaults half empty after naval buildups. When tensions flared, like the 1911 Agadir crisis over Morocco, where France and Germany nearly dueled over phosphates, the gold started fleeing. Banks jacked up interest rates to lure it back, strangling credit for farmers and factories. Can you imagine? A Berlin baker can't get a loan because the Kaiser's yacht fleet drained the reserves. This wasn't abstract. It hit bellies. Unemployment spiked. Bread riots brewed. And the fix. More colonies for more gold mines. But colonies were zero-sum. Grab Morocco, and France seethes. Borrows more from Rothschilds to arm up. Now layer on the secrets. You think alliances were just handshakes? No. They were IOUs wrapped in classified envelopes. Bismarck's reinsurance treaty of 1887 top secret, packed with Russia promising neutrality unless France got kept hidden to avoid spoking Austria. Fast forward to 1915's Treaty of London. Britain, France, and Russia bribe Italy with chunks of Austria and Albania for jumping ship from the Central Powers. Secret clause. A $50 million loan plus war spoils shares. And don't get me started on the Sykes-Picot Agreement, carving up Ottoman lands like a pie, all hush-hush to divvy up oil fields post-victory. These weren't diplomacy. They were venture capital for carnage, with banks underwriting the bonds. Germany, boxed out, turned inward lending to Austria-Hungary, grabbing 71% of their debt by 1918 and stripping their gold vaults bare. It was parasitic finance. Berlin bankrolled Vienna's war machine while siphoning bullion to plug its own holes. The emotion hits hard here. Millions marched to die, but it was gold clerks in Frankfurt calling the shots. And if you're feeling that righteous anger bubbling good, because we're at the midpoint, and here's where it gets really twisted. One American banker steps in with a loan so massive it doesn't just fund the war, it forces a neutral giant to pick a side. What was it? And who pulled the trigger? You won't believe the name. If this web of gold and greed is hitting you like it hit me, exposing how a few fat cats turned rivalries into rivers of blood, do me a favor. Smash that like button if you're raging about these hidden hustles. Subscribe for more unfiltered history that schools conveniently forgot. Turn on notifications, because next up, we're cracking open the banker's playbook. Your support keeps these truths alive. Thanks for writing this far. Now let's finish unraveling the thread that snapped the world in two. All right, cliffhanger payoff. Enter J.P. Morgan Jr., the Wall Street colossus who turned neutrality into a punchline. When war erupted in 1914, America was supposed to sit it out. Wilson preached peace. The public yawned. But Morgan? He smelled profit. From day one, his firm became the Allies' personal shopper. $3 billion in munitions, food, steel all funneled through J.P. Morgan and Company as exclusive purchasing agent. That's over $80 billion in today's money, folks. A single 1915 loan, $500 million to Britain and France. The biggest foreign bond issue ever. Rothschilds chipped in from London, wiring funds to keep Paris afloat. Why risk it? Neutrality be damned. Morgan's partners knew a German victory meant defaulted debts. By 1916, Britain was bankrolling everyone, Italy's full tab. 2/3 of France and Russia's bills. Gold reserves drained. Overseas investments pawned. Private credit maxed out. Enter Uncle Sam. Morgan lobbied Wilson hard, whispering that Allied collapse would tank U.S. exports. The Nye Committee later grilled him on this. Turns out these loans tied America's hands. Default on Morgan's billions? Economic Armageddon. So in 1917, doughboys shipped out, not just for democracy, but to safeguard Wall Street's ledger. Germany tried countering with secret pacts with the Ottomans for gold shipments, propping up Vienna with 3.5 billion marks in credits. But it backfired. Reichsbank notes tripled. Inflation loomed. Central banks, fresh off the press, like the Fed in 1913, suspended gold convertibility, printing fiat money like confetti. No more rules of the game, just endless debt monetization. The war cost $280 billion total. Taxes covered peanuts. Bonds sold on patriotism, bought by grannies and kids hoping to support the boys. But who actually cashed in? The houses of Morgan and Rothschild, raking in commissions while trenches filled with the poor? It's gut-wrenching, isn't it? Letters from the front talk about mud and mates lost. But back home, boardrooms toasted, victory loans, the human cost, 16 million dead, empires shattered. Yet the financial web endured. The U.S. emerged as creditor king, London dethroned, but still scheming. This wasn't an accident. It was architecture. It was by design. So as the guns fell silent in 1918, the ledgers didn't balance. They broke the world. Versailles wasn't peace. It was a debt trap, reloaded with reparations chaining Germany to hyperinflation and Hitler's rise. That Sarajevo bullet? Just a catalyst. The real battle was fought in vaults where gold trumped glory and loans outlasted lives. We've romanticized the trenches, the brave soldiers, the war to end all wars. But the true horror is this. Ordinary folks, your great-grandpa in the mud, mine shell-shocked in no man's land, sacrificed for spreadsheets. Next time you hear, war to end all wars, remember, it was the war that minted modern finance. The Rothschilds and Morgans didn't fire shots, but their ink drew the maps of misery. And today? The echoes are everywhere. Every sanctions tweet, every IMF bailout, every humanitarian intervention funded by bonds. The playbook hasn't changed. Only the names. If this flipped your understanding of history, drop a comment. What shady financial moves have you spotted in modern wars? Iraq? Afghanistan? Ukraine? Hit subscribe. We're just scratching the surface of how wars are really funded and who really profits. Thanks for watching. Stay curious. Stay skeptical. History's not over. It's underwritten. It's financed. And it's happening again right now.